everyone, welcome to the October 21st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Greg Molkowski, and this week we're looking ahead to Saturday's card at Aqueduct, or Belmont at the Big A. 10 race cards, so we're going to talk about the late pick 5 sequence comprising races 6 through 10. That includes the feature race on this card, the Grade 2 Hill Prince, for the 3-year-olds going 1 mile and 1/8 on the turf. That is the second leg in this pick 5 sequence, going as race 7. And Craig, this is not an easy one to put a ticket together because you've got 2 maiden races in the sequence, one a maiden special weight, later on a maiden claimer that's very confusing, and then it closes out with a couple of wide open turf allowance races. This seems like one that's a little bit hard to pare down to an affordable ticket.
It really does, and it's one I probably will skip the first leg. I know we're going to talk about it, but there's a bunch of first-time starters in there, and for me, it's just given how hard all the other races are, I don't want to spend a ton of money on it. It just feels like I'll need to eliminate that one. Maybe not. Maybe the board would change my mind when the betting opens for race 6. So it is a race I'm going to I have handicapped and going to take a look at. But this sequence is tough. For me, I couldn't really come out with it. Certainly couldn't come up with a single in any of these races, and even had a hard time narrowing any of them down. Less than even 4 horses in most cases.
Yeah, these races are particularly wide open, and it does begin with a leg that Craig was referencing where some people might be tempted to go thinner because it seems like a race where you might be able to narrow it down to a few contenders. But as we kick things off with race 6, it is a maiden special weight for the 2-year-olds going 7 furlongs, and those can be tricky races to take too strong a stand in because there's not a whole lot of form to go on. Craig, I imagine there's a horse in this race that's going to take a lot of money, and that is the number 6, Rudder's Men, who is one of the Todd Pletcher-trained first-time starters in here, but seems like the one that is going to be live of the 2 uncoupled entrants that he has here. Irad Ortiz is riding Rudder's Men. It's kind of an obscure pedigree close up by Battalion Runner, a horse that we haven't seen produce too many progeny so far, but this horse has some pretty impressive workouts on the tab.
I assume that was the case when I saw the difference in the morning lines between the 2 Todd Pletchers. And I can understand it if people are looking to play a thin ticket, that's one you would want to lean on. Certainly no knocks. I don't think it's going to be all that easy. I mean, he better come out running because I think the 5-horse Skellig is actually pretty good too. He ran a 91 TimeformUS speed figure second time out going 1 mile. He cuts back for John Terranova, something he is particularly good at. He's rated a 98 on the TimeformUS trainer rating. So I don't want to just concede the race to the first-time starter. And if I was, then for me, there'd be no point in playing the pick 5 because I don't want to start it with a favorite like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Rudder's Men. I haven't seen any of the workouts. Unfortunately, XBTV, where I usually watch the workout videos, they haven't been filming any of the works at Belmont, so haven't seen this horse work out. I did mine the DRF Clocker report to find any mention of this horse, and reportedly on September 25th, he did outwork a Todd Pletcher 2-year-old filly, Seduction, who off that workout went on to be second in her debut, got a 71 buyer. I forgot to look up the TimeformUS figure, but she was second in that race that Good Sam won, that very impressive Chad Brown trained first-time starter. So Rudder's Men apparently worked well that day and has since come back with a couple of gate works, one of which was a 46-2 breeze going 4 furlongs over the Belmont training track. I looked up the workouts that day. That was the fastest of 187 workouts by 3/5 of a second. The second fastest work that day was a 47. So this horse clearly has shown a lot of speed in the morning. Like I said, we haven't seen too many progeny of Battalion Runner. He's had 3 starters on the track so far in his first crop. 2 of those 3 were debut winners, though I think one of them might have been in Puerto Rico. We haven't really seen too many high-profile runners from Battalion Runner. On the dam side, there's not a lot of immediate pedigree, but the dam is a half-sister to Yopan, who was the Grade 1 Forgo winner. It's a very classy second generation of this female family with a lot of speed in there as well, so wouldn't be a surprise if Rudder's Men is a real runner, but just given the fact that it's Todd Pletcher, Irad Ortiz, I imagine he's going to take a lot of money in this race, and I found a stat for Todd with these types of horses that was fairly negative. First-time starters at Naira in 7 furlong dirt sprints with 2-year-olds, he's just 3 for 32. That's a 9% win rate with a 57-cent ROI. So doesn't do particularly well with these debut runners at the 7 furlong distance at Naira. Just some food for thought with a horse that I think is going to be a very short price. And Craig, I agree with you. I think the number 5 Skellig is a viable alternative. I agree he ran very well in his second start last time. This is a horse who was tipped out prior to his debut to get bet down to 7-5 in that Saratoga maiden race. Just ran like one that needed a start that day. That August 13th card was also a day that I had tweeted about recently where the results were just kind of all topsy-turvy. Some horses that won by big margins that day have come back to significantly regress in subsequent starts. So that's just the day I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in general. And Skellig came back to run much better next time. That was a race that completely fell apart going a mile. The slight turn back to 7 furlongs should be perfect for this horse, and I think he's going to be pretty tough to beat.
Yeah, I do as well. And speaking of rudders, men, just for a second, the 2-gate workouts back to back, that seems a little concerning to me too. We don't often see that. Usually you just see one in these spots. So unfortunately, we can't see them to see if maybe there's a slate issue there. But that's something I personally don't like to see. The only other horse I really wanted to mention, I guess that stat covers both of the Todd Pletcher first-time starters. There's a trainer I wanted to ask about. I did do some research, Axel Solaris. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I did look her up. She's a former assistant to Tom Morley, and she's only had 3 starters so far. 2 of them have run third, 1 at long odds. So she also has a horse later on the card that we're going to have to deal with. But it's just an interesting angle and really no idea what to do with that horse.
That actually is a Tom Morley trainee. Tom Morley is serving a very brief suspension for a butte overage. I think it's a 10-day suspension. So that's his assistant trainer, and she is just deputizing for him while he is serving a suspension. So basically, you can view these horses as if they're being trained by Tom Morley.
Okay, good to know. I was wondering if she had one out on her own.
And just to also comment on what you pointed out about those Todd Pletcher firsters coming off the gate works, I agree that generally you don't like to see a ton of gate works, but for Todd Pletcher, this is actually very common for him. When he has a very live 2-year-old, he really does drill them out of the gate in the workouts just preceding their debut. You can see he's done it with both of his horses in here, and I would guess, although I haven't seen this for sure, I would guess that Classic Catch and Rutter's Men have been working in company for arguably the last 2 workouts in a row. I wouldn't be surprised about that. And Todd Pletcher, he will do those back-to-back gate workouts right before a first start, especially with one that is well-meant or has come along quickly. So for him, I wouldn't view that as a concern at all. Let's move on to the second leg of this sequence, race 7. It is the Grade 2 Hill Prince, the feature race on this card. Moving over to the turf course, going the 1.125 distance for the 3-year-olds, and Craig, I had a tough time making a morning line for this race. This field just looks so evenly matched, and to just throw another kind of wrench into the mix, there's no speed signed on here. I think when I look at the TimeformUS pace projector, it actually has that no speed designation, which is uncommon to see in a field with as many runners as 10 horses. But there's just nobody in here that has really shown much affinity for going to the front.
No, not particularly, and you're right, although we seem to be seeing it more and more at Naira, even in some of these bigger fields. It seems like the longer the race is, speeds just become something trainers don't like for some reason, or they're all training their horses to tuck in behind and come on late, and so we're getting more of these labels. And because of that, I'm actually going to lean to a couple horses that are shown up near the front. I think they're going to have an advantage, and I guess I'll start with the Chad Brown horse, McKinnon, new to the Chad Brown barn from the Doug O'Neill barn. He's a horse that we saw have a very good 2-year-old season on the turf. Ran third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile for Doug O'Neill. Then they got a little Derby fever. Not sure what that was about. Tried the Sham, tried the El Camino Real at Golden Gate. The horse ran okay. I worry that he hasn't progressed very much from his 2-year-old season, as he's running just slightly elevated speed figures. But the move to the Chad Brown barn, I think, is good. This horse has shown some early speed, so I think he's a pretty strong contender in here. I'll just start with him.
Yeah, I really don't know what to do with McKinnon. I have little confidence that anybody is going to show intention to go to the frontier, though I suppose if somebody will do it, Flavian Pratt, who's riding McKinnon, might be the one that you would peg that would, kind of think outside the box to show that aggression. This horse has shown some speed in his races early in his career, not so much recently. What I will say is, if you watch his recent races since coming back off a layoff, he's gotten a little bit keen in some of those California stakes. So maybe he's a horse that is wanting to do more in the early stages of his races, and his riders haven't been allowing him to do so. So perhaps Flavian Pratt will be aware of that, and Shad Brown as well. And since he has two runners in here, typically he likes to use different running styles for his horses. So maybe McKinnon is the one that they do send to go forward. I just haven't been thrilled with any of this horse's races as a 3-year-old, Craig. I know that he ran that put forth that big effort to be third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf last year, but recently his form has just been kind of so-so, and I feel like there are others in here that appear to A, have more upside, and just be in better form right now. I went through this race many times, just trying to find a horse that I could latch onto in a race that's this wide open. I typically like to do some price shopping to find a horse that I think is going to offer value, but I just kept coming back to a horse that probably isn't going to be that big of a price, but I just feel like is the right horse in this race, and that's the number 1, Celestial City. I pegged him as the slight morning line favorite at 7-2. He just feels like a horse that, number 1, is in fantastic form right now. He always shows up and runs his race and has just kind of been gradually improving for Shug McGahee. And number 2, he has a great rail post position, has some tactical speed, so he can be relatively forward, and I think Jose Lezcano rides these types of horses very well. He typically likes to ride that pocket, and he figures to put this horse right in behind whoever does decide to show speed, and he can ride the rail throughout, and I just want to make the additional note that this race is run on the original turf course, or the inner turf course, at Aqueduct, and the rails are down this week, and based on the results that we saw yesterday, riding the rail on that inner course was a slight advantage, so I definitely do want to have horses that are going to be inside in these races, so it just feels like there are a lot of signs pointing to Celestial City here.
Yeah, I have no problem with Celestial City. He will be on my tickets for all the reasons you mentioned. He had a good post. He had speed figures that are as good or better than everybody in here. So no knocks on him other than the price. I wish he's a little better price, but with that many positives, you're not going to get it. The one horse I wanted to get your take on, because I think he could very well lead as well and get to that good rail, is Be Better for Todd Pletcher. He hasn't tried the turf yet. He certainly seems like he's bred fine for turf to me. He had a terrible race last time out in the Curlin, where obviously something must have went wrong, because before that he came in off 2 nice wins, good speed figure, particularly in that allowance win at Monmouth. So I was curious about him on turf, and the 6-1 morning line looked a little enticing to me.
Yeah, he's a horse that I really don't know what to do with in here. I won't be surprised if they send him to the front. I would probably say he's the most likely early leader in this race, just because he's shown some tactical speed on the dirt, and so many of these turf horses have just shown very little interest in going forward in their races. I don't know what to do with the turf switch. You can look at the Todd Pletcher stats a few different ways. In stakes races trying turf for the first time, the numbers are not so great. If you just restrict it to 3-year-olds in general, he does okay, especially over the last several years. From a pedigree standpoint, there are some things to like. This Dam, I think, has produced 2 other siblings, also by Uncle Mo. One of them was a minor turf winner. If you go a little deeper in the female family, there is plenty of turf there, and Uncle Mo clearly is a versatile sire that can get plenty of turf runners. Todd Pletcher has obviously been intending to run this one on turf for a little while, ever since the Curlin, because you can see a string of about 6 or 7 turf workouts coming into this. So generally, when he continues to work them over that surface, he's kind of solidifying in his mind that they can indeed handle it. So I expect this horse to run okay. I'm not sure how much confidence I have that he can translate that Monmouth speed figure 2 back from the dirt to the turf. And with Irad Ortiz aboard, I think there's a ceiling to how high his price can be. I would be surprised if he drifts up much off that 6-1 morning line that I set him at. So I didn't know what to do with him. I put him third in my picks. I don't want to leave him out, but he's not a horse that I have a ton of confidence in. Craig, what do you do with the other Shug McGahee runner in here, the number 10 limited liability? A horse who has form that puts him right in the mix. He ran pretty well in the Pennine Ridge earlier in the year. We talked about, I think, on the Pacecast, how he had overcome a poor pace situation to be third that day. I thought he ran okay last time in the Virginia Derby. I just have trouble seeing how a horse like this can possibly work out the right trip in this race.
Yeah, there's no pace. He has absolutely no speed. I'd have to click on the pace projector. He's got to be at the back, if not right, maybe next to last.
He's off the screen.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, it's hard for me to see him working out a trip from the outside. I guess you could look at it, the outside post isn't going to matter for him because he's going to be last and probably move to the inside. But how's he going to work through the whole field in a race with no pace? He's not for me at a horse that's definitely going to take some money.
Yeah, one other horse I want to mention who I will use in here is the number 2 Grand Sonata. I don't love his overall form. He's a little bit in and out. I don't know why he ran so poorly in the Saratoga Derby 2-back, although that was obviously a tough field with Nation's Pride and Annapolis in there. But he had run well against some similar foes in his prior start, the Belmont Derby, that Dueling Grounds Derby that he ran in last time at Kentucky Downs. That course was rated good. It seemed like it was pretty soft. Some horses just didn't really handle it. I see it's a 4 track condition rating in the TimeformUS PPs. So I'm not going to hold some of that form against him, but his best effort puts him in there, and he's got that rail post position and some semblance of tactical speed. So he's one that I definitely want to use.
Yeah, I have no problems with him. I would say this is definitely a class drop, not just because you're looking at the ratings. If you ignore that Kentucky Downs race, that race was run over a bog. That course was soaked, so I don't put a whole lot of stock in that. But before that, I know the Saratoga Derby and the Belmont Derby, they might not be your typical grade ones, but I think they were pretty strong this year for 3-year-old races. So I do think this is a bit of a class drop, and his speed figures stack up well, and I like the inside post.
Well, let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, back to the 2-year-olds, back to the maidens, but a weaker group of 2-year-olds than we saw in the first leg of this sequence, as this is a New York-bred maiden claiming event, $40,000, going the 7 furlong distance, and kind of odd to see a race of this quality in a late pick 5 sequence at Naira, but I get why they put this race here, because it's got a large field, it's wide open, and it makes this sequence a little bit harder, increasing the likelihood of a massive payout. Craig, there's very little form in here. It's hard to separate these runners. As you can see from my morning line, I pegged the favorite at 9-2. I have trouble seeing the public really gravitating towards any one horse in this race. I mean, I'll let you start because I don't know where to begin.
Well, these are races that I don't pay a whole lot of attention to speed figures. I generally look for second-time starters, and we have a plethora of those in here. I do think you can separate them a little bit. I guess we should start with your morning line favorite, Testadora, a colt who took a lot of money first time out for Linda Rice. Linda Rice is a trainer that doesn't do very well first time out. She does way better second time out. So for me, he is the horse to beat. And in addition, when you look at the trip, the horse certainly had pretty much a no-hope trip in that race and really didn't run all that bad. So I think you probably pegged it right with making the morning line favorite the most likely winner. But how likely is that? Shoot, I don't know in a race like this. A couple other of the second-time starters that I looked at was Saratoga Banker, I believe it is. Same thing comes from trainer Michael Dini. He's another one that does okay second time out. I thought the horse had an adventurous trip first time out, so I would give this one another chance. Garth Road, the 6 horse, is yet another one in here for Ray Handel. He's a guy that doesn't really try that hard first time out. Not as in love with this one, didn't take a ton of money first time out, but same thing, he was wide in a race with no pace. I would expect some improvement there. And yet another one, the last one before we'll turn it over to you, is the 10 Fast Study. Same thing, another trainer doesn't have great numbers or even good numbers first time out in Jimmy Ryerson. But I thought the horse ran okay, and his horses generally take a big jump second time as well. So I'd be starting with those 4.
Yeah, you covered most of the horses that I'd be interested in here. Like you, it feels like the second time starters in their debuts ran fast as some horses that had more experience, and they're the ones coming in here with upside. And I do want to make some notes about the trips of a few horses that you did mention. I thought that Testadora, while I agree that this horse is likely to improve second time out for Linda Rice, who just however you break it down has great stats with maiden second time starters and even a positive ROI if you just restrict it to maiden claiming races. Testadora got off to a slow start and had a bit of an awkward break, but I thought after that, relatively speaking, compared to some others, had a pretty good trip, just kind of sat on the rail, made up some mild ground at the end, but never really had to alter course that much, just kind of ran in place, kind of at one pace. So that horse definitely has a right to improve, but I thought both Saratoga Banker the 4 and Fast Study the 10 had more adventurous trips first time out. You kind of alluded to it with Saratoga Banker. You can see what was going on when you watch the head-on of the start, because there was a long shot in this race, I believe it was the number 10 or 11, who just made a left-hand turn, maybe 5 strides out of the starting gate, and badly shut off a few horses to the inside. And one of the runners who got shuffled back in that melee was the 4 Saratoga Banker, who after that kind of got green with kickback coming back in his face, just looked like he had no idea what he was doing as he steadily dropped back through the pack, was last moving around the far turn, and this apprentice steered him out into the center of the course for the run through the stretch, and he actually did make up some good ground at the end. The race was falling apart late, but I thought this horse showed enough given the trouble and greenness first time out that this one could do better. I made him my second pick. My top pick would be the number 10 Fast Study, another horse you mentioned. James Ryerson is a trainer who is kind of under the radar good with second time starters. If you restrict it to maiden second time starters and dirt sprints, he has a very healthy ROI with a solid win percentage. And this horse kind of similarly had a weird trip first time out, more so because I thought Jose Ortiz just rode him like winning was not really a priority that day, just kind of very tentative and conservative with the ride. As they came to the top of the stretch, he was in a decent position, but Jose, I guess, thought he was in maybe a tight spot and wanted to back out, and this horse actually dropped almost to last by the time they got to the quarter pole, and ran on well late while doing so coming through traffic, whereas some others were out in the clear or Testadora was on the rail. This one was having to alter course multiple times to make his run, and I thought was finishing up best of all at the end of that race. So feels like one where he'll be suited by the slight stretch out to 7 furlongs. And I just think in a race where they're tough to separate, I want to look towards the trips for runners that I think can move forward second time out. One more horse that I do want to mention, Craig, who I just don't want to totally dismiss here, even though he has more experience, is the number 7 Flashy Alex. This is a barn that probably is not going to take that much money, Randy Persaud, and the first 3 starts of his career were not that great, but last time out, this horse was just a nose out of third place in a maiden special weight race. Maybe not the toughest maiden race you're ever going to see, but that was going a mile, so the turn back to 7 is not going to bother him at all. And I thought there was a slight rail bias early in that day on October 7th, and he was out in the center of the track for the entire way. So maybe just an interesting angle on a horse that I feel like will be a bigger price in this race.
Well, he's been 43 to 1 or longer in all 4 of his starts, so I don't think you have any problem worrying about getting a price on this guy. No problem with him. He has the co-fastest speed figure. I did want to get your take on the inside horse, Dustin Hoffman, a horse who I think is probably going to take some money because he actually has the best running line of the second-time starters. My concern with him was just Rob Atras is terrible with second-time starters. It seems like he really tries first time out, and if that try doesn't succeed, they tend to regress.
Yeah, I will say Rob Atras does not get a whole lot of live youngsters or 2-year-olds, so I don't want to put too much stock in his first out or second out stats, but I agree. He has had more success with the first time starters than the second timers. Watching the trips in that race that many of these do come out of, this one avoided that early trouble coming out of the starting gate, was just kind of wide of all of that. So he was not bothered at that point, and then he got a great trip up until the top of the stretch. It looked like he had the race won. I mean, you would have thought he was even money to win that race at the 8th pole, and he just kind of tied up at the very end, allowed 3 horses to pass him in the final 16th. So a little bit concerned about the stretch out to 7 furlongs. It's a worse draw this time getting the rail, so I kind of wanted to fade him a little bit if he took more money than some others coming out of that race. Let's move on to the 9th race, the penultimate leg of this pick 5 sequence at NYRA. This is an allowance N1X for open runners going a mile on the inner turf course. And Craig, I thought this was another wide open race. I think I have 7 horses on the morning line between 3-1 and 6-1. It's just really hard to separate these horses. I would imagine that the Chad Brown trainee, the number 7 Eternal Capital, will take some money in here off that impressive maiden victory last time out at Monmouth. I just didn't think he was beating a very good field that day and thought he might actually have to improve a little bit if he's going to win 2 in a row here.
Yeah, I like that you started with the Chad Brown horse because I actually went and watched the replay of that race because it was definitely going to determine my influence how I looked at this race. And as I watched it, I was kind of expecting him to win easy when you see the 5-length margin, not really be asked, but that's not what I saw at all. This horse was pretty much under a drive all the way to the wire. So it kind of explains the margin to me. As you said, it was not a very good field. So he's a horse that I'm looking to beat in here. I'm not going to use him. I mean, we're talking about a lot of horses, and we'll sum it up in the end. I've already said I don't want to spend a lot of money on this sequence because I think it's tough. I'll try to hit it on a smaller ticket. And that smaller ticket, he's not going to be on it for me.
Yeah, I agree. I actually left him out of my top 4 picks in here. I saw the same things that you did and just feel like this is a big step up in class for this horse. Let's talk about some others that are interesting in here. I kind of think the horse to beat, even though he maybe doesn't have the upside of some others in here, is the number 4, Danzig with the Stars. This horse just has really solid form at that New York bred N2X level and more recently at this open N1X level. I thought he ran just fine last time in the same race that Celestial City comes out of, that horse that I liked in the Hill Prince a little bit earlier in this sequence. Just feels like he consistently shows up in these races. There's a little bit of speed signed on to potentially set up his late run, and I just kind of viewed him as the horse to beat.
I can see that. I don't particularly love him in here as the horse you have pegged as the second choice. I don't want to leave him out totally. My one concern with him is he just does not have any speed whatsoever. You can even see that when he went a mile and 3/16 2 starts back, where he dropped back well off the pace in a race that didn't have a ton of pace. So he's just one I'm a little leery of, but he does have good connections. He has that inside post, so I don't want to totally dismiss him. And it's hard to do that with anyone in here. A horse that I was actually interested in was the 6 horse, Mboite, I believe is how I heard John Embrial say it. I don't think that he's a horse that really wants to be on the league like he was last time. He was sent pretty hard up there by Eric Cancel, something he normally doesn't do at all. So that one kind of threw me. But I actually thought he ran a decent race in there. He's one I'm interested in and is going to be a bit of a price in there. And I mean, it was just really hard for me to narrow this one down. Impulsiveness, the 3 horses, one that stuck out to me. I liked his maiden win where he was able to set a slow pace. I don't think we're going to have a ton of pace in here. We haven't really talked about that. I thought the last time just looked like it was a little too far for him. So I'll get your take on those 2 before we talk about some others.
I did not like Mboite at all, but I feel like he could be the biggest price of the 7 quote-unquote contenders in this race, so I don't want to talk you off him. I just didn't see a whole lot that I liked about his form. I am very interested in the number 3, Impulsiveness, so you mentioned second. This horse, he did get a fantastic pace scenario when he broke his maiden, and I have some questions about the overall quality of that race. I know that was a speed figure that I think we corresponded about a little bit because it came up a very slow race, but it was hard to compare it to others that day because the pace had been so slow, and we gave it the pace upgrade ultimately. I'm not sure what the right answer was that day. Some horses have come back to run maybe not as well as you would have expected, though I think we do have the right figure in there. His next race didn't take any money, despite coming off that maiden win, going off at 9-1 second time, or his first time against winners, I should say. And that was a race, the one won by James Jones, that was kind of dominated by runners that were towards the inside. He was in the 2-3 path for his entire trip. I just thought never really was in the right position that day, and maybe Joel kind of gave up on him a little bit prematurely because he was staying on decently at the end. I just feel like this is a horse that doesn't have that much experience under his belt, probably will benefit from that last run. I actually thought that was a race of decent quality. We saw Danzig with the Stars, who also got a trip where he was never on the rail that day, come back out of a 6th place finish in that race to nearly win his next start. So I feel like Impulsiveness can do better coming out of that race, and he'll be a bigger price than the other Todd Pletcher trained runner Steady On, who I did not like that much. Maybe he gets loose up front once again, but I thought he got the right trip last time when he broke his maiden, kind of saving ground on the rail in a race where I thought the runner-up ran a lot better than he did going wide. So I liked Impulsiveness better of the 2 Todd Pletcher trainees, and he'd be my top pick in here along with Danzig with the Stars. They're the 2 that I would want most. The horse that I guess we should mention that we haven't is the number 1 Chilane, who could take advantage of if this race comes apart. But like Craig was saying, I'm not sure how much speed really is signed on here. And Chilane is a horse that will be stepping up against Open Company after facing the York Breds.
Right, I'm not a fan of Chilean in here. The 2 horses we have shown up near the front of the pace projector are Steady On, who, as you said, had that easy trip going wire to wire in his maiden win. Ran an okay figure, but not one as good as I'd like. And the 8-horse Java Buzz, who's a sprinter stretching out. And the fact that we show them right alongside each other tells you that that horse hasn't run all that particularly fast in his sprints. He was able to win last time setting a glacier pace on a clear lead with only a 102 speed figure. So while I suspect Java Buzz will be setting the pace with Steady On and close attendance, I just don't see it being a fast one. So I don't particularly like either one of those 2 or Chilean.
Let's move on to the last leg of this pick 5 sequence. It's another wide open allowance race on the turf. This one for the New York Breds. Optional claiming 45,000 N2X is that state bred allowance condition, going 6 furlongs on the outer turf course. And Craig, I think a horse that we have to start with that I will just say up front I'm not the biggest fan of is the number 9, Not Far Now. He has been impressive, or gotten, I should say, impressive speed figures running against Open Claiming Company in 2 of his last 3 starts. I just feel like he's getting a bit of a class test as he moves up off the claim for a new barn now, Orlando Noda. He's been in some very good barns in the past, Brad Cox and George Weaver, and I could see this horse taking a lot of money with Irad Ortiz getting the mount, and I just see some pace in this race and some tougher horses that are going to make his task difficult.
I'm glad you mentioned the pace, because this is a race we don't have a fast pace flag, but I do think there's some real speed in here. The 3-horse Deep Cover has speed. Phantom Smoke has speed. Obviously, Not Far Now is a very fast horse and will probably lead, but I don't think it's going to be the easy lead that he's been gifted. And I won't say gifted because he is fast, but I think he's going to be challenged sooner rather than later. And it's not like he's a horse with the most heart. He almost always leads his races with a furlong to go. And more times than not, he doesn't close the deal. So he's a horse that I want to try to beat on the big step up.
I think it's interesting that you kind of mention him getting back into a tougher pace situation with the likes of Deep Cover and Phantom Smoke, because you might remember a race from earlier this year at Belmont that featured an insane pace situation. That June 26th at Belmont, 20-4, going 6 furlongs for the opening quarter, 43-2 to the half mile. Well, that was the last time these 3 speeds all hooked up in the same race, and Not Far Now and Deep Cover just kind of went nuts on the front end that day, setting a crazy pace. I don't know if they're going to do the same thing once again, because I imagine the connections might be looking to avoid that situation, but I think it's just, it speaks to the fact that Deep Cover is, or I should say Not Far Now, is getting back into a race that has some more formidable pace players, whereas he has not faced that in some recent races. I agree of those likely speeds. Deep Cover is a horse that is a little more interesting to me, or maybe I shouldn't say I agree, because I don't know if you expressed that opinion yet, but I'm assuming
I do.
I'm assuming you agree. He's another one of these runners that has been trained by Tom Morley, and the assistant will be the listed trainer for this race while he serves that suspension. But I thought this horse, obviously compromised by that insane pace setup 2 back, but I thought he came back in a race last time against Phantom Smoke, and I thought he should have won that race. That was a spot where I thought Eric Hansel just kind of blew it a little bit with the ride, got a little bit scared on inside, did not want to go through a hole, deferred to some other horses in the early stages. Then Irad Ortiz, who was on Phantom Smoke that day, kind of opened up the rail to sucker Eric to come on through at the top of the stretch, then shut it off, as Irad is apt to do. So Deep Cover had to alter course again in that race. He should have won that last race. I wonder if he can overcome a pace setup where he's unlikely to get the lead once again.
I agree, and that's the reason I'm actually leaning a little different direction for my top pick, and that's more to the outside in the 8-horse Yarrow, who's faced a lot of these horses in the past. And it just seems like he's been getting tough trips, a ton of blue fractions in his running lines where he's not getting pace which he obviously needs. And I really like his last 2 races. He seems to be a horse that's improving. I think going back to 6 furlongs from 5.5 he's run the last couple times is going to help. But I just really like that he's probably going to get more pace in here. And I think he might get overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, he's a horse that has been very popular at the windows recently, but I feel like this is the first time in a long time that he's actually going to be a decent price. And like you said, he's supposed to get some pace to close into. So he's a horse that I definitely considered in here. I think I made him my 3rd pick in this race. But there's a horse that is also supposed to be closing in this race that I think might just be a cut above from a talent standpoint, and that's the number 1 Ghost Giant. And the big question with him, obviously, is the turn back and distance, because he's primarily concentrated on 2-turn races recently, distances of a mile or longer. But I think just looking at his recent form, people might forget this horse actually is very versatile, and they haven't sprinted him that often recently, but if you dig a little bit deeper in his PPs, he once was an effective turf sprinter. He could go as short as 5.5 furlongs. He's been effective going 6 and 7 in the past. So distance is not a big concern for me with him because he's shown such versatility. And you might say, oh, well, they've concentrated so much on the route races recently, he's not going to possess that speed anymore. Well, I would just look at the last 2 turf sprints that are showing on his card. One of them was a 7-furlong race back in June where he faced Dancing Buck, who was a horse that we might see in the Breeders' Cup in a couple weeks. And the last time they sprinted him 6 furlongs was about a year ago at Aqueduct, where he faced the likes of Sanctuary City and Big Package, who are stakes level horses. So I think he actually ran pretty well in both of those races, and turning back, he is supposed to get pace to close into here, and if he can translate his recent speed figures back to the sprint distance, I just think he makes a lot of sense, and I'm kind of hoping that Linda Rice scratches the other half of the entry, Click Attack, who I don't like, because that would ensure that I get a bigger price on Ghost Giant.
I think it's a given one of them's going to scratch. It is Linda Rice after all. Hopefully, I agree. It would be the latter. Ghost Giant, my note on him is he is the horse to beat in this field. He has the best speed figures. The one concern is the turn back. As you said, it's been a while. This is all the way back to 6 furlongs. I worry with these horses sometimes that their speed gets dulled a little bit, but I do think he's a major contender. I actually have him 2nd behind Yarrow, but in this race, they're the 2 I will probably use. As I said, I don't want to go too deep in too many of those races, and I actually think those 2 are the 2 most likely winners, led by Ghost Giant.
Yeah, I do like Ghost Giant. He's my top pick. I'm not way against Deep Cover. He is actually my 2nd pick in this race. I'm a little concerned about the trip. I just feel like from a natural talent standpoint, he is near the top of the class in here. It's just a matter of whether Eric Hansel can get the right trip for him. And Craig and I agree. Yarrow is a horse that I will not be surprised if he gets into the mix. Well, that covers all of the races in this sequence, Craig. Let's do a brief recap to go to the start, and I'll go first this week since I usually let you go first when we do these recaps. I will say in this first leg, as we go back to touch upon it again, race 6, a horse that I didn't mention who I would want to use, we just kind of skipped over him, or I did inadvertently, is the number 10 Classic Legacy. He's a 2nd-time starter for Belmont, whose runners tend to improve, especially on dirt with a race under their belts. And he was just facing a really tough field first time out. Echo again. I know he came back to run poorly in his next start, but he was very good in that debut at Saratoga. And Classic Legacy just feels like one that was not well meant that day, didn't take any money, and should do better for that start. He's a half-brother to Art Collector, so there's pedigree here. And he's my 3rd pick in here, but he's one that I do want to use because I don't like getting too confident in first-time starters showing up in races like this, especially when the stats aren't totally in their favor. So I'm speaking about Rudder's Men that I'm a little bit skeptical of, though I'm not going to be surprised when he runs off the screen here because those workouts are impressive. But Craig and I were in agreement that the number 5 Skellig is the horse to beat in that first leg. In race 7, the Hill Prince, like I was saying, Celestial City is my top pick. I just feel like he's supposed to work out the right trip in here. I'd also use the number 2 Grand Sonata. I'm intrigued by the number 6 Be Better, not quite sure what to do with him, but those 2 rail drawn runners I think are more likely to get the right setups in here. The 8th race, I was most interested in the number 10 Fast Study, that James Ryerson second-time starter. I also like Saratoga Banker from that same race. They're the 2 that interest me most, and if I had to throw in a bomb, it would be the number 7 Flashy Alex, who should be a price going out for the Randy Prasad barn. In the 9th race, I made Impulsiveness my top pick. I don't have a ton of confidence in here, but just feels like he's a horse that still has some upside, and I think he could work out a better trip in here than he got in his last start. Danzig with the Stars is the other one that I would want to use prominently in there. And then closing out this sequence, Ghost Giant, my top pick, and I would also use the number 3 Deep Cover and the number 8 Yarrow.
All right, in the 6th race, I will most likely skip this race and play a pick 4, as I mentioned. We'll see what the odds are, how crazy they go on Rudder's Man. I do think Skellig would be the horse to beat if that one doesn't live up to the billing that he's probably going to receive. But not putting a whole lot of interest in that race, as I'll likely just move on to the pick 4. In the Hill Prince, I kind of like the speed horses in here. I'm going to lean on Be Better and McKinnon. They would be my 2 A's. I'll use as backups the 2 inside horses, Celestial City and Grand Sonata. In that 8th race at Maiden Claimer, I like the second-time starters. I would lean on Saratoga Banker and Fast Study as A's, Testadora and Garth Road as my B's. In the 9th race, that first allowance race, this one, I'm like you. It was a tough one for me. I was going to use horses like Emboite. I'll probably just use all these in equal strength because that's basically how I feel about them. I don't have any big opinions in here. I would use the 4 Danzig with the Stars. I'm a little concerned about his speed, not having much speed, and impulsiveness, the one we mentioned, while not using the Chad Brown horse at all, because I think that one's going to get overbet. And then in the last race, I'm going to have Yarrow as my top pick, just a little bit different from you. I would use him as an A, probably Ghost Giant as an A as well, and then Deep Cover as like a B-type horse.
Well, that's a look at a very difficult pick 5 sequence at Belmont at the Big A on Saturday. Tough one to really narrow things down or put together an affordable ticket, but hopefully you have some strong opinions and maybe we've helped solidify them for you by going over these races. And like Craig said, if that first leg is proving too difficult or you don't like the way the board is setting up, you can always skip it and play the pick 4 where there's a bit more tangible form to go on. So that's a look at these races from last week. Craig, we will of course be back next week to recap some of these on the TimeformUS Pacecast. Of course, the stakes at Aqueduct. There'll be stakes action at Keeneland as well. If you want to find out Craig and I's opinion on the Raven Run and the Perryville that they're running at Keeneland on Saturday, just check out DRF's YouTube channel. We did stakes previews of both of those races, and Craig will recap these races next week and probably at some point in the near future do a look ahead to the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I think the pre-entries come out next week. Not sure how much big stakes racing there is. I don't know if we want to start on Friday with some Breeders' Cup stuff. Well, that's way off in the future, though. Let's talk about that next week.
Yeah, a week and a half could be a long time in horse racing, so definitely plenty to happen before that Breeders' Cup rolls around, though it is just 2 weekends away. Well, Craig, thanks again, and thanks to all of you for listening to this podcast. Remember, you can always check out these top podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, everybody, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up next week.